Okay, well, it's 7 o'clock on the dot, so we'll go ahead and kick this thing off. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So here's just a quick agenda on the screen. I'm just going to go through a couple housekeeping items, and then we're going to get right into hearing from you guys. So I do a lot less talking, and you don't have to hear me, and I want to hear you. So let me just bring up a quick slideshow, because what is a Zoom meeting without a PowerPoint, right? And can everyone hear me good? I think my thing should be working good, but so just a quick recap on how everything's going in general. So this is our first small group meeting, but it is the sixth meeting, which is exciting. So we've had a couple of the small breakout groups over the last 2 days and earlier tonight. And just remember, everyone be respectful of each other. I haven't had this problem, but just a reminder, we're all here for the right reasons. We may have different opinions or different paths we want to go down, but just be respectful of everybody. I want to go in the housekeeping item I wanted to go over is the shared folder I created for each group. So you should have gotten a link that allows you access to a shared folder. And I will actually bring up ours for this group. So group F, documents, and here within this folder, I have 2 things right now, but please feel free to add things that you think would be a great conversation starter you find interesting, whether it be like a research paper or some numbers or interesting article. Throw it in here for the group. I will keep throwing stuff in here and sharing things with you guys. The one thing I do want to ask is that I think it'd be great that if you guys could communicate with each other too, if you'd want. So unless you have any objections, please let me know. I will share everyone's names and just their email addresses in the Group F member kind of spreadsheet. And if you wanted to add your phone number or anything else, you can, but I'm just going to share email addresses and names so you guys can communicate with each other. If you hear someone say something really interesting and you want to talk to them more about it, but you didn't get a chance, then people can reach out to each other and we'll all build a great working relationship. So this is the resources links that the first 8 I've emailed out to you guys before. The others on here I threw on because I thought they either be pertinent to this group or some other groups have mentioned things like this. So I thought it might be interesting. So for interest, a lot of groups are asking kind of with the new dispensaries and marijuana dispensaries in the state, where's that tax revenue going? So I threw a couple things in there to show you how much tax revenue is coming in from that and how and where that is going currently. Same thing with the lottery. People have asked, oh, where's that lottery revenue going? It used to go to like education stuff. Where is it going now? There's information on that in here too. We can discuss that too. I can bring that up later if we'd like. But these are just things I thought would be interesting for you guys to check out, give more context, or maybe spur some interesting ideas. I think that's always good to share as many resources as possible with each other. So that was mostly the housekeeping items, but now today I want what I really want to get into and what you today for is to identify some of the biggest hurdles, some of the biggest issues you guys are seeing in your communities or you see with the budget formula overall, and then start to kind of refine where we want to look for solutions. And in the following meetings, then I want to kind of like gussy up, kind of narrow down some proposals that we would like to put forward to the legislature. The biggest thing I want to like reiterate, which we talked about in the first meeting, was thinking outside the box. Be creative. A lot of times legislators or even us get caught in this is how the budget formula is, this is how it should be, and maybe you want to do a little this or a little that, but think creative, and it can be big or small. I think that's important too, that we kind of have a buffet of things that we think can improve the education system, whether that just be some small tweaks of administrative burden that we can lessen on our educators, or a grant program to incentivize something, or a bigger picture thing like fully overhauling the budget formula. So think big, think small, think creative, think outside the box. And the last thing I have to say is, I know this one's about formula, so it kind of covers everything. Some of our other groups are a little bit more drilled down in specific areas, but we don't have to stay on a topic. All of this intertwines. Teacher retention has come up in every single meeting that I've had so far. So just we can talk about anything, go down any rabbit holes that we want to go down. We never know where that may come or what we may get out of that. And I have to say, I've learned something on every single one of these meetings, so I hope we can all learn from each other, just be creative. And then the last thing I want to do is just a reminder about the next meeting. So the next meeting is on Wednesday, June 26th at 7 p.m. And you will get emails from me reminding you. And thank you for everyone. I know the first email I sent out had a broken link, so thank you for being patient with me. This is the first time OPI has done anything like this. I don't think any agency or anything has done anything bringing in this many community members from different areas to have this discussion. So I think it's really cool. I think we can get some great ideas out of it, but obviously there's growing pains. So thank you for your patience with me as I navigate this. But now I am going to stop talking. And what I want to do is hear from you guys. So we have a pretty decent sized group on here today. So I know sometimes we could talk over each other a little bit. So try to do the best you can. I want you to unmute yourself and talk whenever you think is necessary. I know it's sometimes difficult on Zoom, but please just be a part of the conversation. So what I want to start off with is I want you guys to talk about some of the issues you're seeing in your community. But first, I would love to do quick intros. Since there's about 17 of us on it, keep it quick, but I would love to start and everyone just say their name and then like one sentence on why you want to be a part of this group or an interest area you have. So Robert, I'm gonna ask you to go first since you were the first one on and you're on the top left corner of my screen.
All right, my name's Bob Griffith. I'm a retired Air Force officer and a retired teacher. So I wanted to be part of this. Funding formula is broke and it needs to be fixed. And it's going to take a little longer than one session in the legislature to do this.
Thank you. And I'll let people just go as they want to. You do not have to say hi, but I would love for everyone to say hi real quick. So if someone wants to just offer to go next, and we'll just keep going down the line. The next on my screen is Jenny. I don't know if Jenny wants to go next.
I can go next. I'm Jenny Mernan Butcher. I work for Montanans Organized for Education, which is a nonprofit that supports community members and parents that want to get involved in the legislative process. And I just finished a class for my master's degree on school funding and delved into the Montana funding formula. So I would love to be able to apply that knowledge.
Sounds like you should be running the meeting over me at this point. You have a lot more experience, but thank you. So let's keep going down the line.
I think we see the line differently than you might on our screen, depending on how we all signed on. But I'll go since I'm talking. So I'm Jim Malizia. I'm a parent in Helena. I work for the state, and I guess my prompt for wanting to participate is I'm seeing all these budget cuts happen in real time, whether it's teachers being cut or programs that right now, as levies haven't passed, that this free quality education that's an individual right is sort of dissolving before our eyes, and I think it does need a massive overhaul.
Thanks, Jim.
Funding that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
No,
Luke, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Luke Miskevich. I live here in Helena, Montana. I was on the Helena School Board for 6 years and the School Boards Association for 6 years. I'm a parent of 2 daughters, one who graduated from Helena Public Schools, and my youngest is in high school. And yeah, I don't think our public schools have the resources they need to either fulfill their constitutional burden, but also live up to their moral burden to do its best for our kids. Thank you.
Thanks. Justine?
Hi there, I'm Justine Alberts. I am a parent, a taxpayer, parent times 2. My husband works for the district here in Helena. I'm a former district employee, going back to be a district employee, and worked in higher education the past year. My call to this was, I think, very similar to those who spoke before me. I see a system that needs some support, and I'd like to extend my volunteer hours and my voice and some legwork to make it happen. Thank you.
Great. Carrie?
Hi, I'm Carrie Fisher. I am the Finance Director, District Clerk for Belgrade School District over by Bozeman, and I'm dealing with the funding formula daily. And so when I got the email to participate in this program, I was like, yes, I really want to participate because I'm like Bob, I think something is broken. And broken is a great word for it. It may have worked in the past, and I really feel like there needs to be something that changes that makes it maybe even a little less complicated when you're going out for mill levies and bonds or whatever. Like the average Montanan doesn't understand how schools are funded. We just went out for a bond and it failed miserably. And a lot of it was a lot of people, when you bring up the marijuana tax, is thinking that it was going to come to Montana schools directly. Well, you're getting all this extra money from marijuana, and you get the lottery money, and you guys get all of this other money. What are you doing with it? And it's like, we don't get it. So the average taxpayer doesn't understand school funding. So I feel like the formula is broken, and also something needs to change to make it so that it's a little bit easier for people, the average person, to understand how schools are funded.
Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Butt. I am a teacher at Gallatin High School in Bozeman, Montana. I got into this mostly because the call went out, and I had served on the Budget Consensus Committee for the Bozeman Public Schools, where the conversation directly related to funding about how to eliminate or reduce our budget over this last summer kind of spurred my interest on how things are actually funded. And so when this call came out, I was like, yeah, I can serve on that committee. So that's why I'm here.
Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth Latham. I'm in Great Falls, Montana, and I'm a parent in the district. But for the last several years, I've been working with a community-based group here in Great Falls called Kids Education Yes, or KEY, which was established in the 90s to help promote appropriate funding of our public schools. And so we're a little ahead of the game because we've been talking about this for a long time. But we have been saying for quite a while that the funding formula that exists currently is broken and isn't working for anyone. And so we're here with ideas and lots of energy to move forward.
Bridget?
Hi, sorry. I'm Bridget, and I'm a teacher in the Helena Public Schools. And in a former life, I also worked for the legislature and have that background as well, working with the funding formula. And like everybody has talked about, I do think it needs a little work. I think education has changed a lot. And I think money and funding and all of that needs to keep up with it and change with it as well. So hopefully we can come up with some good ideas.
Adam?
Hello, my name is Adam Clinch. I am a math teacher at Capitol High in Helena. I have also been a member of our district's bargaining team for the past few years. And so through the bargaining team and then being a teacher every day, I see the consequences of a broken funding formula. And so I wanted to provide my inputs and learn from others. So that's why I'm here.
Great. And we have two Kates, but Kate Isel?
It's Isley. That's all right.
Sorry.
Yeah, like the Isley Brothers, who you're probably too young to know who that music group is. I'm a secondary teacher in Big Sky, Montana at Lone Peak High School, and I am our local union rep, and I'm on the bargaining team. And so this is something I've been interested in for a while. I meet pretty regularly with my superintendent about funding. And even within our own district, like in our community, people don't really understand how it works. And I know people have this perception of Big Sky as being really wealthy, but our school district is running a deficit and we're laying off 9 people this year. So like this funding formula is like hurting everybody everywhere.
Second, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Cordes, and I teach at Skyview in Billings, but I actually live halfway between Billings and Red Lodge, so I straddle in a way 2 counties and 2 types of areas. I will both readily admit this is not something I know a lot about. I would agree and understand the basics of the fact that it needs some work, but I also think it's really important for teachers to be aware and to share with each other. We don't all necessarily have to be experts, but in order to contribute to helping solve any sort of challenges, I think we just need to know more. So I'm here to learn and hopefully to help be part of any solutions.
Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Coatman. I'm the business manager clerk at Elder Grove School. And we are a K-8 school west of Billings. We have we had 700 students. Now we're down to 630 because of the House Bill 203, the out of district. So I've been a clerk finishing up my 6th year, and we're a base funded school. Our demographics in our district are residential and farmers. There's no businesses, there's no bank, there's no community center, there's nothing. And we are really struggling to just keep up with the demands of the legislature, that all those laws that passed, and then the OPI demands that have been put on the schools as well. We don't have the funding for it. And we've cut 2 teacher positions, and we still have to find another $75,000 to cut. So I just feel that the funding formula that we have, equity and quality, it's not working. And the schools that are in areas like myself who cannot get a levy passed are struggling. Thank you.
Amy?
Hello, I'm Amy Pizzola. I am the superintendent principal at Cayuse Prairie Elementary, which is in between Columbia Falls and Big Fork. And I'm here because next year we're looking at $177,000 deficit. And that's really scary as a superintendent when you're doing bare bones already. And I would really like to figure out what we can do together collectively to solve the issue with all of us having budget funding issues.
And Keegan?
Yeah, my name's Keegan Witt. I'm in Missoula. I'm a parent and a trustee on the school board here and a CPA in my normal daily life, but I don't know enough about the funding formula yet. Trying to learn more. What I have noticed, though, is that what everyone is kind of talking about feel like schools are kind of getting choked off a little bit slowly, especially like as inflation rises and stuff, and the inflationary adjustment doesn't keep up. And so looking to help make fixes to the funding formula to help everyone across the state get a good education.
And then last but certainly not least, Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Fons, and I'm wearing a different hat. I know some of you recognize me from OPI and working with the ESSER wonderful funding, but I'm actually here. I work with students. I've been volunteering for about the last 20 years, helping students get scholarships for college. And so that issue of bridging to college or bridging into CTE is always an issue of money and where does it fall? And so I'm very interested and want to put in as much time and effort as I possibly can in assisting.
Well, thanks, Wendy. And I'm sure I will lean on you during this too. Wendy has a great depth of knowledge, more so than I do. So thank you, Wendy, for joining us tonight. So this group, congratulations, guys. This is the highest attended small group Some of our other groups got like 15, but you guys #1 with 17 total. So since this is a little bit more crowded of a group, I guess it makes sense possibly to raise your hand or just, again, be respectful of people when they're finishing up their comments. But I, again, want to turn it over to you. So who wants to be the first one to talk a little bit about the issues that you see? Well, Jenny already raised her hand. So Jenny, go right ahead. But talk about some of the issues you see and let's start identifying the things we want to try to tackle.
So our organization is statewide, and we've been talking to a lot of the AA superintendents recently. One solution that they've proposed is reducing the decrement amount. So, by that meaning that every student receives, I think it's 20 cents less per student for elementary and 50 cents less per student for high school. In terms of their per pupil funding amount until you get to the 800th student, and then those students are funded at that 800th student level. This is especially affects Billings more than any other district, being the biggest district in the state, but it affects all of the AAs. So either getting rid of the decrement or matching the high school decrement to the elementary decrement. So it's not 50 cents per student, it's 20 cents per student. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but when it's multiplied by thousands of students or, in a big AA school district, that could be really meaningful. And the AAs, I think the funding formula is not working for anyone, but the AAs have, of course, the largest deficits. And this could be a fairly simple tweak that could really benefit them.
And just so you guys are aware, I'm looking down because I'm taking notes. One of the things after this meeting, I'm going to put together like a mini white paper. So then as the meetings go on, we can kind of narrow it down or kind of polish things up. So that's why I'm looking down. I'm taking notes, and I'm also recording this meeting. So I make sure I get everyone's ideas recorded and down and summarized. But that's great. I haven't heard that suggestion yet. So anyone else would like to speak up on that or a different issue? People being shy. There's too many of you for all of you to be this shy.
This is Carrie. I'll speak up. I would like to see some more ways to fund students who have special needs, not just special ed kids, but you have students who are gifted and talented. You have students who are English language learners. We have our at-risk students. We do, like, some schools do get Title I funding, or they can get a grant for gifted and talented, but those are grants. Those are like one-time only money. They're not guaranteed. But yet, like, having a large Latino population move into the Belgrade area right now, we're experiencing it where we need a lot more resources for that population, and we don't have the ability to do that. We're looking at having to hire more teachers and everything, and we've tried to put like one at each school, but even that's proving to be even more difficult. We have parents who don't speak English, and they have a hard time even enrolling their child. So the resources that it takes to work with those families requires a lot more. Gifted and talented, like, just to offer more opportunities and things for them. Like, I feel like there are some states, I think Tennessee just redid their funding formula, and it was very much weighted, like a special ed student right now, we get the same funding for all special ed students. It's not weighted as to whether that student needs a one-on-one aid or they're just in a small group. So I feel like when we did ask for more special ed money, the legislature said, oh, here, you can use your tuition fund to do that. But then that just goes right back on the local taxpayers, which I don't think is necessarily fair either. They did this tax shift and really pushed a lot to the local taxpayers. Our building reserve permissive levies and all of that kind of stuff just went right on to the locals, and not, they're saying, oh, we're giving you the opportunity to get more money to do building maintenance and all that kind of stuff. But really, it's the local taxpayers that are footing that bill, not the states, not really helping us other than giving us that opportunity.
So talking about the special ed, you brought up Tennessee, is something you would like to see maybe, and I'm not endorsing anything, just facilitating conversation. But I know some states do have a more defined tiered system. So they tier it as in with the special needs students that need a lot more attention, a lot more money, maybe that one-on-one aid, versus some special needs students don't need quite as much assistance. So maybe a more defined tiered system, and you get more money depending on the needs of those students.
Yeah, I think the population that you serve and the, you know, right down to the cost of living for your area should help determine your funding. You know, obviously hiring teachers and staff and being able to live in a place like the Gallatin Valley or up by Whitefish or something like that, like your salaries, everything have to adjust to that. So there has to be something built in that deals with the actual local level needs as well. And I just said we need to make it less complicated, and this sounds like it's more complicated, but I think the biggest thing for funding complications is how what the state funds that 80%, and you have that maximum budget without a vote and your maximum budget with a vote. I think that's what really confuses people, because they think, oh, the state says this is your budget and then you're coming to us, where really the state built the system. I say the state as the legislature built the system, so we have to ask for mill levies to get to our maximum budget. And I really feel like that would be nice if there was a standard budget where you didn't have to go out and ask every year for a mill levy. Because if you're growing, you're going out every year and you're asking for a mill levy, because otherwise you can't keep up.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So based on that, and I realize that a lot of the legal language and the statutes and the Constitution sometimes feel a little squishy, but based on, and I'm a lawyer, based on everything I read, we have this word guarantee popping up over and over and over again. And to Carrie's point, if something has to come to a vote on an annual basis, there's no guarantee. And any system that incorporates that, even if there's local dollars that are separate from the general fund, I get that a formula that has both might have to exist, but this just having to ride the political winds or financial winds, economic times, to see what happens next year is not something anyone can build a healthy program or system based upon. And even the state statute, which I believe probably came out either in response to or in anticipation of the Columbia Falls case in 2005, which more or less said, legislature, you have to define what a quality education is. Montana Code annotated 20-9-309 lays out very clearly what the legislature thinks should be a free quality system of education. And you can go through them line by line if you look at them and say, wow, we're falling short on all of these. And so between not having a guarantee, where, you know, I get why people don't want to vote through levies right now, because, well, we all experience 20 or 30% tax increases. But at the same time, if this is an individual constitutional right of the students, it can't be left to those feelings. And I understand that ultimately the money's coming from all the same places. It's all coming from our tax dollars. But there are lots of other priorities that the legislature puts forth that aren't constitutional in nature and aren't a defined right. And that has to take priority.
Robert, I think you wanted to say something too.
Yes, and I agree with everyone. This is broken, but and how they fund this, and A and B, I don't think is the correct way to fund to get the funding to the students. If you have one student, you still have in fourth grade, you still need a teacher for that fourth grade student, or you still have to have a classroom. So I think it's chapter 55 that goes and and it says that, tells you the number of students that are required, or the minimum or the maximum number of students in each grade level or in each one. So rather than funding by A and B, why don't you fund by the number of classes you're required to have? At least that way you're getting yourself a little more money. And the other thing that I think they, the amount of increase for inflation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's only 2%. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, inflation is much more than that. So this, where this money is going to come from is the big problem. I mean, where can you propose to take this money and to refund, or to reshift this money to someplace else? I mean, in order to get it to education where it needs to be, because they're right, it is a constitutional right. They spent the time to try to guarantee the education. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Keegan, I see you actually physically raising your hand.
Yeah, I can't find the button right now, and I'm not spending the time to look for it. I mean, yeah, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said. Like, if we're above minimum budget, and let's say, even though our number of students go down, but other things happen so that we actually need to get more money for operations to stay above minimum, we have to ask for even one more dollar. And it gets really confusing for taxpayers. And I'd love to diversify out of property taxes as being like the main thing in ways, because a lot of the taxpayers come up to me and say that since we're elected and stuff, and they feel like, well, you got a ton of money in schools because all your property taxes increased. Like, that is not at all the way it works. And we all know that on here. So if we're talking about making things more understandable for the taxpayers, either that would need to be the way it works, or we need to make it very much not out of property taxes the way it is currently. Being in a bigger district, I think cost of living adjustments for where we're at is huge. Like, and not just for areas that pass their levies, like Kalispell doesn't tend to pass, and that area has gotten to be incredibly expensive, and there should be some adjustment for that. But overall, the base just needs to be higher, right? Like, the small schools in the small areas struggling to, but for the most part, I want to listen. Like, I was really excited for a few people's backgrounds, like Jenny, like your background, really excited for that. So curious if people have ideas as to how to actually implement things like this.
Well, I just want to note a couple things. One, the inflation issue is something that's come up in a lot of the meetings. So tying it to actual inflation versus capping it at that 3% level. It sounds like something that everyone's in agreement with, that I talked to in all the groups, that is addressing the inflation rate. So I know that's had one of the bigger costs, underlying costs that people don't think about at the schools, utilities. So utilities costs have gone up a lot, right? And then insurance too, the insurance liability and property insurance has gone up a lot. And so those are things I want to make, I think you guys are all shaking your head. So those are things I think we all can keep in mind, and inflation has a big role in why those things are more expensive. So that one's pretty straightforward, but yeah, I would love to, Jenny, go right ahead.
Yeah, Katie, has anybody talked about specific asks that we want the commission to look at in the next interim? Because I know in the 2015 interim study, they didn't do like a full-blown adequacy study like what was done in 2005. They looked at really specific questions related to SPED and a couple of other areas of interest. And I do think it would be really important that we direct that commission, because the legislature has to write a bill to form the commission, that bill is really specific to look into some of these big concerns. So what is the actual cost of utilities? What is the actual cost of, property insurance? What does it actually cost to pay a teacher a living wage in a high cost of living area? I just think it will be really important if we're not going to do a full-blown adequacy study again, that we direct that commission to ask those specific questions. I don't know if that's come up in any other groups.
We haven't gotten too much into actually the decennial kind of budget review, but I think that's great too, to build in to some of our ideas to the legislature. So build that in, like, these are our recommendations that the commission look into, and here's some of the legislative fixes that we recommend as well. So I think that's a great point that hasn't come up yet at all. So that's, yeah, awesome. I know there was some talk about A and B too. And one of the things that has been brought up in other groups too is the A and B is calculated for the previous year, right? So it's calculated 2 times the previous year, and that average is used. Something people have brought up is, especially this is more acute in some of the smaller districts, and I know a lot of you guys are in the bigger districts. They could have one family move in with 5 kids and have to deal with that, and that's not reflected until the next year's A and B. So I think we should discuss a little bit of how A and B is used in the funding formula, and what you guys see as adjustments possibly to how A and B is used. I know Robert brought that up. So does anyone else have any thoughts on A and B?
One thing my superintendent and I have talked about a little bit is maybe some kind of sliding scale. Like I think Carrie was talking about more with respect to students, but with respect to the district, potentially like the cost of living, or relative to the tax base in a place where, like, I actually live in West Yellowstone, and I commute to Big Sky to teach, and development here in like West is really stagnant, and so the property tax base is not really changing, and so what's happening is just everybody's taxes are going up. Kind of almost disproportionately. So kind of maybe rethinking, rather than just having like a flat amount that everybody gets. And then the other kind of idea my superintendent and I have talked about that he suggested was maybe the legislature could change rules around what levy dollars can be used for, or some way to like increase max budgets, but then that is put back on the local voter. So like the voters can decide if they think the schools need to, or their district needs to increase their max budget beyond the 20% cap. Yeah.
And I saw Wendy, your hand was going up.
I was just a couple of people had echoed some things that I really see there in terms of, the public really does need to be brought in and made more aware. I don't know how the best way to do that when you have 402 different websites, different, everything, but maybe some suggestion at the state level to have some, there's always a balance between individual control and centralized, but because of the hat I wear helping students get into college that goes across all platforms, the amount of information that's available on one site that one person knows about versus another that may be 20 miles away. I'm in Ravalli County and we got 6 school districts down the line. It's kind of amazing. So some centralized deployment of information with ESSER, those $605 million that was allocated in basically 11 months to all schools, that has been somewhat centralized, but it's going away. So you lose that. So I'd like to see if possible, I think resource sharing ends up happening when that information is more transparent and easily accessible. And we have a large population in Montana that is over 50, 55 years old that is retired and very willing to jump in and volunteer and help in a gazillion capacities, but they simply don't know how to. And so they may not be tech savvy. They may not know how to navigate every individual school site. Retired teachers are across the board. Many of whom want to work just, they'd come in and volunteer and teach one class one day or one class every single day. don't want to be paid at all. So there's a tremendous amount of resources that are out there that aren't being utilized. And somehow making those resources more available, more easy to get to. In addition to, I can't echo enough the dependency on looking at only A and B or only certain pockets of funding and not targeting, you know, it's not just at-risk kids. I don't remember who said that, but it's not just at-risk kids. I have 2 kids who are dyslexic, and one was identified and one wasn't. And so the funding that's available across the board for both is needed to be more transparent.
Well, Kate, you threw a question in the chat. But I don't know if you want to, oh, and I see Carrie's hands up too. But what do you think of the equalization issue? That seems like a big hurdle legislature won't want to touch.
Yeah, I just bring that up. I kind of Jenny's thing about Eric Matthews' bill to allow an overmax budget levy request that failed. It seems like that maybe is part of why it didn't pass. So, and I mean, maybe you can speak to that a little bit. I'm not an expert on it, but my understanding is like taxpayer dollars like go into the kind of into the state and then they're redistributed. So I think there is a perception like I do teach in a very like wealthy school district by perception, the resorts here, but we're in a weird situation. Our district actually is in Gallatin County, and a lot like Big Sky Resort is in Madison County. And so a lot of that like property tax money goes to the Ennis school district. But voters whose kids go to our school, because there's not an easy way to get to Ennis, vote on Ennis levies. So it's like, it's complicated where I am, and but at the same time, like we don't necessarily have any more money than anybody else because of this equalization thing, which I'm not saying is right or wrong, but it, you know, like I commute 90 miles a day to go to work because I can't afford to live in Big Sky. So, and there's a lot of teachers that live in Bozeman that commute up to where I live, or that commute to Big Sky because they can't afford to live in Big Sky. And so like all of these things are kind of like wrapped up together. Like even if we got a pay bump, most people probably still couldn't afford to live in Big Sky anymore. So it's just like, and I think probably the same thing's going on in Whitefish, and the same thing's probably going on in Bozeman. Like people are probably getting pushed out of Bozeman. People are probably getting pushed out of Belgrade now, I would imagine. So, you know, like cost of living is a huge thing, and like school districts can't afford to pay people to live in their districts in a lot of like kind of, you know, growing communities in the state. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but I don't know what anybody else thinks of like this equalization thing and whether that's something the legislature would even touch or consider changing.
Before I turn over to Carrie, one thing I want to say is that just in my experience with like legislative stuff and convincing legislators if you want, again, I'm an impartial party on any of these ideas, but sometimes it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes you throw out really good ideas or really maybe out of the box ideas, and at that moment there's not an appetite for it. But I've also seen like 5 or 6 years down the road, the appetite change, the perspective change, because people have talked about it. They've worked through issues that they thought they saw in it. So I think it's important, like I said, to have a bunch of different ideas. And even if we think the legislature may not bite at something now, that doesn't mean it's not worth talking about now. Because there's not a light switch we're going to flip and everything's going to be fixed. This is going to be a long process, and it's not going to be fixed in one legislative session. So just, I think that's something to keep in mind. But Carrie, I want to turn it over to you. You had your hand up.
I was going to comment on the A and B funding by A and B, because it's so volatile and it changes from year to year. And I mean, there's a basic cost to keeping a school open. I mean, Bob alluded to it too. Like, you still have to have a classroom, you still have to have a building. If our enrollment in fourth grade, I mean, we have 250 fourth graders. If it goes down by 5, we're still paying the same amount of teachers to teach the rest of the 245 students. If it goes down by 20, we might be able to reduce the number of teachers. But when you're looking at 5, I mean, that's still fourth grade. What is that? Close to $20,000 that you're losing for those 5 kids, maybe even a little bit more. And so I feel like the A and B it can't be the main thing that you fund off of. And I know that we do get some like quality educator money as well for the number of qualified teachers that we have, but it's a very low amount. And I struggle with whether that should be higher or what, because if you don't have the students, you don't need the teachers either. And so I understand why it's based off of enrollment of students, because that is the main driver for needing teachers. But at the same time, there are costs that come for your overhead and things like that, that whether you have 10 less students or even 20 less students in a district the size of Belgrade, it really doesn't change your overall overhead costs per se. You're still going to have a superintendent. You're still going to have a finance director. You're still going to have some of those things that you can't really budge on. You still need somebody to manage that stuff. So I feel like there has to be maybe some more thought into not just basing it so much on students, but then also really looking at the needs of the population there too. Like I said, the ELL students and special needs and gifted and talented and all the other areas that students fall into that may need extra support.
Yeah. Jim, I see your hand up.
So something I can acknowledge I'm guilty of not looking into prior to this is, what are other states doing? If we have this system that it seems like there's collective agreement that is at the very least not working well, but most people acknowledge is broken. I went to a legislative interim committee meeting on education a couple months ago, and it was bipartisan acknowledgement. And I think there was more of an appetite than I would have expected across the room. Say, okay, we have to address this. Now, the extent to which people might want to address it is a different thing. And I heard a few murmurs of, well, let's do an interim study, which means let's punt to the next session. But there seemed to be more interest than I would have anticipated. And I guess you could say I'm generally pessimistic on those things. But if we can look to other states, there's potentially 50 other models out there that, okay, if we're trying to, if our parts are broken, it's not just the structure itself, but we have all broken inputs, that might be something that we can look at and say, well, here are a few models, state legislature, that might make it easier for you to digest some sweeping changes, if not complete. I don't know, point to one state that, okay, their income tax or real estate taxes aren't nearly as high as ours, yet they're providing excellent educations or paying their teachers, 20% more than we are. And just anecdotally, I have family members in other states where I'm seeing that, where they're paying less taxes and the teachers are, and the resources available to the students are much healthier. And I mean, and to that end, I think the bedrock of any correction here has to be taking care of the teachers, paying them. And it's a supply and demand issue too. I mean, you're going to get more qualified teachers with higher credentials, and teachers are going to be more motivated to get them if they have to compete with each other for those extra dollars. It's going to make people want to stay in state or stay in the profession, as opposed to, saying, I need to just get food on the table, so I have a job doing something outside, and I'm going to leave mid-semester, which I've never seen before or heard of in any state, and I've seen that a few times in Helena this year. And I just, so I think maybe there are models out there for a systemic change that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So one of the resources I put in there is a 50-state comparison, and some of it's very top line. But if it does make you feel any better, everywhere I've talked also thinks their funding formula is broken. So until a state finds a magic bullet, but
Yeah.
that doesn't diminish what you're saying at all. I think it's so smart. There's a lot of ways Montana's leading in some innovation, but there's a lot of ways that other states are leading. So I think it's a great idea to look at other states. We technically have a hybrid system where some of our funding, a lot of our funding is based off of the A and B, but there's also other funding sources. Most states do have a hybrid system, and most states do have some type of equalization where richer areas, property taxes or tax dollars for education goes to other districts to offset their lower tax base or whatever. So most states do have some type of equalization. Most states do build in some type of A and B or student count. Most states do have a hybrid, but how they establish those hybrids are very different.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow, we were talking a lot about a lot of different things. Did Justine, did you raise your hand?
I did, but I think Wendy was first, so I will wait.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I just put it in the chat. So what Jim was talking about, the legislative session last term did a case for change. I think it was NCE did the presentation in a large, they were hired to basically walk the legislators through several of those other state, other country. Is there a need for us to change? What does it mean? Why? So that is available for anybody who wants to take a look at it. I will say that on the college and career access point, I've been advocating for a long time, and as a part-time homeschool parent, I advocated very strongly for all homeschool parents to get their kids tagged in to the public school so that at least if they weren't using the A and B funding associated with their students, that it could at least be used by the school. So I brought in about 37,000 over the high school career for my kids into the school district. Also did it for students who were incarcerated, because either an incarcerated platform, the A and B isn't being picked up, or when they're part-time, they're not being picked up. And just as a source of income on that A and B, those who are in the non-public school platform who are doing dual enrollment, that also can be picked up
12.
with regards to A and B funding can also be picked up. So those, I couldn't agree more that just having that discussion more at the legislative level is important. Dual enrollment has come a long way in the last 5 years, but the A and B tag into dual enrollment still isn't picked up across the board. And in Ravalli County, we have 1,000 kids who aren't in the public school. So add that times the A and B and you see how much is being not picked up. And it can be. It's not that there's a percentage of parents who don't want anything to do with the public school. I get that. But there are a lot that were like me who just said, hey, if my funding can't be used by me, I want to give it to the school. How do I do it? So it's there.
And just so you guys know, yeah, like to piggyback off Wendy saying, I know the legislature is very interested in this. They have a Ledge Days coming up, and it's basically bringing all the legislators to Helena, and they're all going to be meeting, getting briefed on things. And there's a briefing session on each day specifically about school funding. So there is an appetite there. They're looking at it. So that's why I do think this is really important, because some of the members that are like maybe not as tied in with education are really going to get beefed up on it. It's the 3rd week of June. So I think that's why our group is so great, because I think people will be very interested in this and they'll be looking for creative ideas. So there is interest there. I don't know how big their interest is, but there is interest. So Amy, and then Keegan.
I've been in education for 31 years, and I think one of the things that is broken is the fact that we have to spend it or we lose it. when things are going well in districts, I think we should be able to use it like a good business person would, and, you know, save for a rainy day for certain things. I know everybody's buildings need additional funding, and I think if we had that mentality, I also have a sister who is a secretary in Wyoming, and she's constantly saying we have to spend $100,000 or we're going to lose it. And I'm thinking, you know, I've been in districts where they have a lot of money too, but that mentality is wasteful. And, you know, it's much like, you know, ESSER was amazing in a lot of ways. It gave us the things that we needed at the time, but there's always that infinite timeline that we have to spend it by a certain time. We are so rushed to make decisions. And with all that we have going on, if we just had more time to really think carefully about how to spend things, I think things would go a lot better once we get the max funding that we actually need again.
No, and I think that makes sense in what you talked about with ESSER, how, like, there was a lot of flexibility with ESSER. There was still a time frame, but having that flexibility or the carryover. And also, I think that's something very approachable for the legislature too, right? The bigger and the smaller ideas. And Justine, I am so sorry I skipped over you after Wendy, so you go right ahead and then to Keegan.
It's all good. I don't have a whole lot to say. I sat on the assessment standard review committee a couple months ago, and just something I'd like to bring up is when we were reviewing the assessment standards and we updated them, and I'm sure this applies to the other standards as well. There was at the end, it was like, okay, what's going to be the fiscal change for this? And I don't know that the committees that are put together or the people sitting on every one of these administrative rule revision teams understand the fiscal impact that updating the standards can bring to districts, schools. So the example I can bring to this is we had a technology levy that didn't pass. And so now we're looking at reducing devices, but we are going to be held accountable to testing, and that 95% testing of students multiple times a year. That's going to be a drain on instructional time, resources, just a lot to consider that wasn't necessarily put into consideration when we met. So just thinking about that, and I think there was some other what I want to say, surveys put out when we were looking at accreditation standards for counselors and administrators. And part of that, you couldn't move forward with the survey without talking about the fiscal, what was going to happen. How much money would this be? So if you're coming into this and want a voice in it and can't put a number to it, I'm afraid that's also skewing what we're working with and the accountability that's put in place and what we're held to that standard without being backed with funding. So that's all consideration there.
Thank you. Jim?
One thing I haven't heard on the inflation issue, and that seems to be universally acknowledged, is, well, we're in a hole because of that. And I think maybe an important point to be, or thought is, well, let's backfill that hole. We're I think, at least hearing from a lot of the AA schools, majority of them are in a desperate place right now, and it sounds like some of the smaller school districts are as well. Well, just backfilling that hole might help places stay afloat and not cut programs and tons of teachers and all the things that allow for a good education, while this gets figured out. And so if inflation was 8% in 2021 and 4.5% in 22 or whatever it was, well, we're based on the funding formula, we're at least 6% behind. Well, let's fill that hole so at least we can get back to baseline and not address things from a place of desperation.
Oh, and Keegan, I skipped you too. I keep skipping people because I look at the hand and then I'm like, oh, that's the person I want to call on.
No, I understand. And I looked in, like, it's supposed to go into participants and then it's supposed to be at the bottom right to find the hand,
No,
and
don't
mine
worry.
doesn't have it. So like I've looked and it does not have it. Mine kind of piggybacks on Jim with kind of filling the hole, is saying like this is supposed to be a longer term fix when we're talking about the budget, like, and the funding formula. But there's some one-time things that they can do right now when they're flush with cash, right? Like they can backfill that hole for inflation. Something that I've noticed a lot of the smaller school districts have been able to do over the years, like even Lambert, Montana got it with oil money. Like they were able to get some teacher housing and stuff, like some staff housing. And right now, where we have some of these really high cost of living places, it'd be great if they looked at some sort of like grant type program to do things like that. Because right now, like we can't raise wages for teachers because the inflationary adjustment, that all comes out of the general fund. But if you move things out of the general fund that still benefit them, like housing, it helps all the districts anyways, right? And we can do stuff with things like that. So I'd like for the legislature to look at some more one-time backfill type options as well as they work on fixing the formula.
To piggyback off your housing, in another group, a gentleman was from Colorado and he talked about some interesting ways there that they tried to address the housing issue. And they encompass more than just teachers. It also included police and firefighters and people of those nature. But maybe I can throw in kind of in the resources, kind of what Colorado did regarding specifically housing and like kind of the cost of living for housing. I know it's a small piece of the puzzle, but we looking at states and how they creatively have done things is always good.
Yeah, I'm very curious what they did. And with the housing in particular, one thing that we've noticed a lot of school districts have across the state is a lot of property, including MCPS, like a glut of it. And some of it is not usable for school buildings ever. And I know at least our current board is willing to be like, well, as long as it benefits the district long term and we don't just sell a property and then take a bunch of money, like get a few $1,000,000, we'd burn through it quickly. Like we're more than happy to use property for a longer term benefit, even if it's not, this is going to be a school site. It can be, well, we can build some townhomes for teachers, but getting that stuff, the initial funding for it is impossible right now for us. So
Luke?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much or anything original to share. I just want to thank everybody for the outstanding points they've made and maybe add a little bit of context to a few things. I mean, you know, Katie, you said that this process, sometimes the process of change takes time, but that perhaps perspectives are changing. And listening to this conversation, I immediately go to how do we make some of this stuff happen as opposed to backing up and saying, well, what should happen? But I will share that I think, and I say this as somebody who's from Helena, I think it's really important for us to think about, to both document the case for change by looking at districts of all sizes throughout Montana. And when we look at solutions, hone in on those solutions that can be of benefit to all the districts, not just the AA's, but no matter what size. So thinking about that, I just really want to tag on to the two proposals that Carrie shared starting us off. I mean, that weighted per student funding, I think that is something that I think about a lot, and that we have, you know, an obligation to serve students, every student who walks in the door, and we need to start with where they're actually at. And students need different services. And I think we ought to have a per student funding that acknowledges that. Yes, we have the at-risk payment, but I think that's inadequate. And as I think Wendy pointed out, that's not a holistic enough measure to utilize. And I think that the second point I want to make is you know, Carrie said this first, but others have talked about it. You know, we need a realistic inflationary adjustment. And yes, the 3% cap seems kind of laughable in the context of actual inflation over the past 2 to 3 years. But even if inflation comes down, I doubt that. I suspect that CPIU metric that they're using is not, my sense is it's not capturing the actual increase in our costs to educate students. And so I think we ought to think about looking at the actual metric we're using to gauge inflation or the increased cost of educating students, and see if we might be able to land on a different measure. Again, that idea will benefit all districts throughout the state, no matter what. And the last thing I'll share, and this was shared by Carrie and Kate, I believe, and Bob as well, this idea that maybe we ought to de-emphasize per student funding and focus on per educator funding. And I have actually heard an idea recently being talked about by people who know far more about the funding formula than I do, but of essentially doing that in almost decreasing the A and B payment, but substantially increasing the quality educator payment, or which is afforded to districts based upon their FTE of staff. So that's an interesting idea, and I wouldn't have thought it probable that it would be considered, but I think there's some serious people who are talking about doing just that, and I think that's something that we ought to research more and carry forward as a group. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the insight.
Well, I know we're running down on time. It's supposed to be an hour, and you guys have been, don't tell the other groups, the most creative thus far. And so that's really exciting. And I think you guys, one of the things we really did a great job today is identifying a lot of the issues that we've seen. And I'm gonna, like I said, put this kind of in a white paper so we can all review it and start narrowing things down. One thing I want you guys to talk about, we started touching on, is coming from the legislator point of view. Everyone here thinks that there needs to be more funding in certain areas, if not all areas. Where do we want that funding to come from? And I think that's important to suggest too, and it doesn't have to be one thing. Like I said, other groups have talked about, where's that marijuana money going? Where's that lottery money going to? Those are also still small pieces. The majority of the tax dollars that come into the state are income tax dollars. So those are important things to keep in mind, but let's just start thinking about that as well as we kind of start to narrow down on some of the issues we want to address. A lot of it comes to funding. So let's, as we kind of go over the next couple months, think about other funding sources and how we want to fund education. Because I think that's going to be really important to go along with any of our suggestions is where that's coming from. So before I kind of wrap up, I'll do a last call for any questions or anything like that. But I also, if you want to send me a message or an email, let me know if there's a lot of really educated people on here that probably know a ton more than me. But if there's an area you're interested in that you're like, I want to know a little bit more about this, just shoot me a note and I will try to look up and find stats, find studies, find numbers, maybe try to pull numbers from OPI if you're looking for anything in particular. So please let me know if there's something that you're looking for that you can't find and we can share with the group. Other than that, before we sign off, I'd be happy to talk to you guys all night, but I'm sure you have much better things to do than listen to me talk. So last call for any comments or questions or anything before everyone gets back to their regular lives. Yes, Amy.
Yes, Catherine, I have
of sharing, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware. If you have any questions with regards to your specific districts or funding of ESSER and allocation and use thereof, you're welcome to give me a call. Our information, we have a lot, it's all public, it's all out there already, but it is sometimes difficult to navigate. So you're welcome to give a call or send an email and ask questions.
Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Catherine, I had one more thought. Montana is a tourist industry, and I think if we were to tax the, whether it be hotels, motels, how, whatever is coming in, and putting that towards education could help lift the burden for
So
funding education.
I think this should be good news. I watch all the committees, and that's something that the revenue committee is talking about right now, is how they actually were talking about in the local government committee today as well, is how to capture those tourist dollars coming in, and how the communities that, like, especially communities maybe in between Yellowstone and Glacier, people drive through there. How do we make sure that those communities are also capturing the dollars that coming for tourism? Another idea that I know has been floated by some people in the legislature and also in some of the other groups is doing a property tax rate that is different for, say, someone's second home who's not a resident of Montana. So if you live in California, you have a nice fancy home. In Montana, you come visit, you actually have a higher property tax rate than the person who's actually living in that community on a day-to-day basis. Or also, same type of thing, a Verbo or Airbnb having a different property tax rate than, again, someone's main home. So those are all things that I've heard talked about, not only in legislature, but in the small group. So I think you're barking up a tree that a lot of people agree with.
Katie, is anybody talking about sales tax?
I mean, I've heard that bantied about in the groups too, but yeah, I actually, on one of something earlier today, I heard, I'm trying to remember who was saying it, but talking about how Montana does not have sales tax, and how it was in the local government committee, and actually trying to tailor the sales tax to get more money from the out-of-staters coming to piggyback off, bring them both together, the sales tax going towards items that are more geared towards tourists, but then also they were also talking about this, and I'm not a tax expert, so I don't know if this sounds complicated to me, but I'm sure they could figure it out. Having people be able to get a rebate back on their tax dollars if they're actually a full-time Montana resident, so a sales tax wouldn't hit full Montana residents as hard, and still capturing those dollars of the tourists coming in. So that was actually discussed today in the local government committee. Okay. Well, again, want to be so respectful of your time. I want to again thank everyone for their time. Number one, number two, thanks for being flexible with me. Thanks for dealing with me through the growing pains of setting up a new thing and a new group. So like I said, what I'll do is I'm gonna put together like a little summary of what we kind of talked about today. Put our thinking caps on for next time as we kind of start to refine solutions and kind of how we want to word and present things to the legislature. But again, thank you so much, everyone. I know that, you took out time from your personal lives to talk to me. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Stay in touch. If you have any other questions that pop up between now and the next meeting, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, you will get emails from me between now and then. So thank you. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Good night.